Today, we're looking at a green ink by Sailor Tsuyuhikari, which I really think I've just butchered there. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, there's timestamps down below so that you can skip around to the parts you're most interested in, or if you watch the whole thing, I'd appreciate you. You can follow me on Instagram, and if you're new here and like fountain pen inks as much as I do, I would invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with the ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Parker jotter with a medium nib, used it to write for a day, and to take the notes for this video. In order to standardize some of my writing samples, I always use Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper for all of the inks. I do use other papers, and some of those will show up later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it came in a vial like this. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Now I don't have the medium writing samples because these writing samples occurred during that time frame that I had broke the nib of, that the iridium point broke off the Goulet nib, and it was while I was waiting on the new one to arrive. So these writing samples don't have that. Now let's look at the Clairefontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does have some shading, although it's a very light ink the whole way. It does offer some darker spots in the shading, like the H and the K. So there are some spots that are a little bit darker. The extra fine is quite a bit darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and some very nice shading going on. Brown starts lighter, gets very dark, gets light. Fox goes from lighter to darker. The goes from lighter to darker. 5 seconds to dry. This scrubby shows plenty of color variation, and we got plenty. Tomoe River. No bleeding. Less ghosting than normal for Tomoe River. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no real shade. This is where I went back and corrected a letter, and it just got darker because I went back over it. Extra fine is darker than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no real shading, 9 seconds to dry. The scrubby showed no color variation, and we got none. And Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 had no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. Now the extra fine is a little darker than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer some shading. Brown goes from darker to lighter. Fox goes from lighter to darker. Over goes from lighter to darker. 7 seconds to dry. The scrubby does show us some good color variation, and we do get some good color variation. I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see there's this very, very light kind of khaki brown at the bottom, and it pushes its way up, and we get this very light green across the top that then gathers and looks darker as a line. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And the khaki color on the bottom is a little bit darker, but other than that, you really don't notice the difference between these two chromatographies. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I probably wouldn't use this in a note-taking situation. I accidentally highlighted the word flush first. It blew out. Half of the word high is blowing out. I wouldn't use it if I want to go back and highlight in note-taking. Now water is reactivating and lifting this ink up off the page. It's only 30 seconds, a little bit longer, and it'll all be gone. And that's just a drop sitting there. So water is all that you need to clean this out of your pen. Now Pen Flush does everything that water does and nothing more. You don't need to use it. And things you don't need to use, 1/3 bleach solution, which does completely obliterate it off the page. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. I'm also linking a video that shows how I do my testing and my calculations. Sailor's Tsuyuhikari has a viscosity of 1.49, making this a very wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples, and for the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Sailor's Tsuyuhikari has an average dry time of 7 seconds, making this a very fast drying ink. Instead of finding inks that look like Sailor's Tsuyuhikari, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I wanted to go with a very nice purple and chose Diamine Lavender. The second writing sample is done on yellow Rhodia, black and red, and white lines paper. Here we're looking at the yellow Rhodia to see what kind of tone change we might go through for having the yellow backdrop, and really nothing at all. It makes no difference on it, showing that this is a rather opaque ink. Even though it's very light, it's more opaque than it is translucent. That green stays the same tone of green. How about black and red notebooks? No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no real shading. Only when I went back to fix the eye, because I put an A in there, did it get a little bit darker, and that was me going back in after I wrote the word. Extra fine is a bit darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, some nice shading throughout. Brown starts darker on the B, but on the R gets lighter and stays lighter. Over is a nice light word all the way to the R that's much darker. So there's spots of shading, but not a ton of shading. 3 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby does show some color variation, far left to far right, but there's not a lot of color variation in this writing, just like in that scrubby. How about white lines paper? Well, we have spots that it's coming through a little bit with the stub, spots we're seeing when it comes to the extra fine, but it's not coming through and touching the page underneath. It does give the slightest bit of show through because of the deeper, the inks getting in, but it wouldn't stop you from using the back of the page. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. The extra fine is darker than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, spots of shading, like the K in quick is darker. The word the is darker than the word brown for sure. So it is there, sort of. 2 seconds to dry. The scrubby does show us some color variation far left to far right, and we do get some in the writing, and that is all that I have for the writing samples. So what do I think of Sailor's Tsuyuhikari? The tone is far too light for me. It can offer some decent shading, but the tone itself, which really is distracting for me, makes me think of a darker green highlighter. So what pen and nib is going to give the best writing experience? The only thing I can think that does really well is going to be a very wet fine to put as much down and really put it onto the page. But again, it's kind of a fluorescent green, so I would probably go with a double broad as a highlighter or a parallel, again, as a highlighter. If you've enjoyed this video, remember, I like thumbs up, you like thumbs up, everybody likes thumbs up. Unless you didn't like it, then give me the thumbs down. Both are good. Thanks for watching.